What is up, guys? Welcome back to a brand new reaction, and today we're watching 7 myths British people believe about America. I was trying to think of one before I started this video, and really the only one I can think of is Brits think all Americans are fat. And that's just simply not true, okay? We're not all fat. Yet. Give us some time. We'll get there, okay? We'll get there. But that's about it. That's all I can think of. So join me. Let's learn you something. We're about to get into it. You're new to the channel. Hit that subscribe button. Drop a like if you want to see more reactions like this. Go check out my other channels with me and my girlfriend, and then my outdoors channel. Link down below in the description. But other than that, let's get into it.
But it is amazing what 14 years of living in the United States will do to your understanding and your perceptions about this very country. For instance, I learned early on that they don't have Cornish pasties, and I learned slightly less earlier on, so later, that Michigan has them. But I don't live in Michigan, so one way or another I still have to have them imported. A quick
what the hell's a pasty, huh?
reminder that if you're not subscribed to this channel, you can change that fact about your life right now. But these myths go way beyond the absence of quintessentially British food. And so now that I've lived here for about a seventh of a century, it's time to outline some of the myths that us British believe about America and Americans.
Everyone lives in a giant house. I wish. That would be nice. That would be really nice.
It's a funny one, because I think television gives us this notion that Americans do all live in giant houses like the McAllisters do in Home Alone. But it's not entirely the case. Sure, I mean, statistically, American houses are on average larger than their UK counterparts. There are a number of reasons for this, which I outlined in this video.
Yeah, I feel like it's just because we have so much more space. Like, America's so large, we can kind of afford... Well, not like I can't afford it, but some people can't afford it. But they can afford to build bigger houses just because there's more land to build on, I guess.
But to say that all Americans live in really large houses is a complete fabrication of anything resembling the truth. And I was a good example of this before I became a YouTube sensation, because when I first moved to Chicago, we had to do things on a budget. Between me and my wife, we weren't making a great income, and this is a major city, so we had to sort of settle for an apartment whose dimensions were 300 square feet. And for those of you...
Yeah, that's about what we're living in now. Basically, what we're living in is a garage, but like a third of the garage was converted into like a mini apartment. And simply because it's just a lot cheaper. We can stay here, save up money to either buy a house, build a house, do whatever. And that's a lot of times what a lot of Americans are going to have to do. You're going to have to downsize to be able to save money to then buy the bigger house. Unless you live in like freaking New York or something where like $3,000 a month gets you like 10 square foot, so.
If you don't know, that's about the size of a shoebox, roughly. You know, we had to leave our shoes outside the door. That's how small it was. And it is worth reiterating, I think, that the cost of living in the United States does fluctuate massively across the country. When I lived in Indiana, just one state over, we were paying about $530 a month. That's basically unheard of in Chicago.
Yeah,
and it's
that's $530 is like, that's still low for around here, but that's about what you're gonna pay if you want to live in the middle of nowhere. But you want to live in like Chicago or New York or California or something like that, break out the Benjamins. $500 a month will maybe, and I mean maybe, get you half a cardboard box in New York. Maybe.
Heard of in New York City, which of course was the city in which the show Friends is set, and I think it's shows like that that gave us this impression that Americans were all living in big apartments.
Each street has thousands of houses.
I was alerted to a tweet recently from a British person who couldn't believe that American addresses go way up into the thousands, and their belief on this was that every street in the United States has thousands of houses on it.
Hey, at one point, we lived in a house where the address was 11414. And we were on the low end of that street, too.
This was a belief that I used to have, because the country is absolutely massive, so you almost expect it to have to house that many people. But the thing is, there are way fewer people in this country per square mile than there are in Britain, so it doesn't add up.
True.
And that's when I got looking into it, and in a previous video I outlined it doesn't really work like that. On any given street, they don't start at the number 1 and then end at 10,000.
Yeah.
Often, and it's the case here in Chicago, you'll usually have a string of houses, for example, all in the 6,000s on a given street. And that's because it's about 6 miles from the center of downtown. 1 mile in from that, they're all 5,000s. Another mile, they're all 4,000.
See, I didn't know that. That's kind of cool. Like here, the street we live on here, there's like 4 houses. But at the beginning of the street, the address starts with 300. And then by the end of it, you're at like the 700s. Again, there's only like 4 or 5 houses on this street. So I've never really fully understood that.
etc., etc. Now, not every city in the US does it from the center of the city. It could be from another part of the city or just some other central point. But that's sort of a general rule for how the numbering works on US houses.
US doesn't have a history.
This one comes up again and again, that the United States is such a young country that it basically doesn't have a history. And I've always thought of this perception of America to be quite a lazy one. Because even if you go back to 1776 through to the present day, yes, it is a short amount of time in comparison to the history of Britain, but think about all of the insane things that happened in that period.
Yeah, I feel like we definitely have a history. It's just our history compared to the UK's is like last week. like going back to 1776 is like last week compared to some of the UK history. Like y'all go back thousands of years, we go back a couple hundred, you know, so.
Even if you ignore all that, there's one thing that we tend to forget because we don't get taught it very deeply in Britain, and that is the thousands of years of native history that happened before we even turned up.
Facts.
I was absolutely blown away, not literally, that would be weird, when I went to Cahokia Mounds here in Illinois. Many, many hundreds of years ago, Cahokia Mounds used to be a native city, and it had about 20,000 people, which might not sound like a lot by both American and British standards, but back in the day, that was more than London. And I once read about this volcano eruption that happened in present-day Oregon a few thousand years ago. And this eruption was witnessed and recorded by Native Americans who were in the area at the time. And long story short, they basically saw the origins of Crater Lake, which is absolutely huge. This one is embarrassing for me because years ago I believed that Canada and the United States were basically the same country.
Nah, Canadians are a lot nicer.
And the reason that I believe that is, number one, I was 12, so cut me some slack. And number two, my only sort of exposure to both countries was through the people, was through the way they spoke. And to my young ears, which couldn't yet differentiate these two accents, Macho Man Randy Savage and Bret Hart basically had the same accent, just with an entirely different timbre. And that's all I had to go on. And I think it's what a lot of British people have to go on, because I still occasionally see those comments. Oh, what is the difference between Canada and America? Or is it essentially that one has Mounties and the other doesn't? And it's only since I moved here that I've become super aware of the substantial difference between the two countries. Completely different healthcare systems, completely different food, completely different use of English.
Basically,
right?
take everything America was supposed to be and just add a lot of maple syrup, you got Canada.
In Britain, we call it the loo. In America, they call it a restroom. In Canada, they call it a washroom. And I've seen all manner of different examples of that kind of thing. In America, they don't celebrate Boxing Day. In Canada, they do. The Canadian dollar is different to the American dollar. In some ways, they go with British English in places that America doesn't. And now that I'm older and I've listened to some of the regionalisms throughout the United States, even the way Americans speak is different to how Canadians speak. I'm not an expert on that, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but these differences certainly go way beyond how the two countries pronounce the word about.
What?
I've touched on this before.
No, this is just facts. This is like extremely facts. This is not a myth. We are just, we're just loud. Like, we're just loud. And like, if I'm loud right now, just turn the volume down. But I've only met like a few people that weren't from America, but all of them were always super quiet. Like, they always just like talked super quiet and super light. No, not a single one was loud like we are. So yeah, this is not a myth. We're just loud people. Annoying, loud.
Couldn't really do a video without including it in this list. This perception that Americans are loud and boisterous. And I can understand on some level where that comes from, because I think the way Americans speak, it comes from a different part of the throat. So it's a bit more projected, right?
True.
Whereas us
That's
Brits,
true.
it's more sort of, I don't know, understated a lot of the time. I think another reason that we think Americans are loud is how they present themselves in films. There might even have been a time in my life where I thought all Americans were loud just because Jim Carrey was.
True.
He's Canadian, isn't he? He is Canadian. And culturally speaking, I definitely have found that Americans speak at a higher volume when they're in restaurants together. But there are so many other examples of the opposite being true. On match day, after we've had a pint or six, you know, we're singing the songs of our team who we love because they happen to be situated in the town that we were born in. And it's just what we do when we leave a nightclub, which, you know, I haven't done in 20 years. But when we did, you know, I'd be on the street yelling at traffic cones because that might have just been me. But what I'm saying is, when we get drunk, we very much give Americans a run for their money.
See, and now when Americans get drunk, we turn, like the volume's already turned all the way up. We somehow break it and keep on turning the knob. Volume is not a thing when you got a couple beers in you. It's just not the case.
A loud person in all of us, right? And once we free ourselves of our inhibitions, we can let out all of the decibels we want. That's not a call to action. It's merely an observation. This is only funny, not because of the image of Americans walking around with bomb bags on, but it's because we call them bomb bags and you call them fanny packs.
I will never ever call it a fanny pack again. It's a bum bag for the rest of my life. If I see a random person on the street wearing a fanny pack, I'm gonna say, hey, nice bum bag. And then I'll probably get punched, so, yeah.
Bloody hilarious. It is also partly the visual, because bum bags have never been cool, but this notion, which I occasionally read, that Americans are just always walking around wearing one is...
They used to be cool, then they weren't cool, but now they're cool again for some reason. But you can't wear it around your waist. Like, you have to, like, wear it like a satchel almost. I don't think I've ever owned one. Or no, I did, but I just bought it because I was making a video with it. That's it. And if you know what video that's from, you're an OG. You're a real OG.
It's very laughable, especially as somebody who's lived here 14 years. So it's quite dumbfounding, this one. I'm not saying that all British people think this way, but the ones that do, I'd be very interested to hear, do they think that way because they met an American in 1994 and they've just held on to that belief?
See?
Or are American tourists still wearing bum bags? Do people carry cash? But I don't. I can tell you this, I don't have a bum bag / fanny pack radar, right?
I feel like the only time I would wear a fanny pack is if I'm like in the UK as a tourist. Just so I know I got everything right there. I'm not worrying about it falling out of my pockets or anything like that. That would literally be the only time I wore one. So you know what, that kind of makes sense. When you're traveling, going somewhere, and you just want to make sure your phone, your keys, your wallet's all in one thing, the bum bag was better.
Constantly surveilling the populace to see whether they do or do not have a fanny pack. But my feeling is, I don't remember seeing one in a while. So I think this is one very time-specific stereotype that can now be laid to rest. All right? And yes...
Autumn? Nah. It's fall.
So I thought I'd include one that was quite topical, not just because we are in the autumn, but also because I mentioned this fact on my YouTube short yesterday. Now, while for reasons that were laid out in that YouTube short, Americans prefer the term fall, I was surprised to find that the word autumn was pretty common among Americans. I don't know if this is a recent thing, like the whole country just woke up one morning and watched Lost in the Pond and thought to themselves, yes, we're changing things now. Or if it's just sort of always been here as an alternative to fall.
Yeah, it's like if somebody says, hey, what are you doing this autumn? I know what they mean. And it's definitely probably like a regional thing. Like, I feel like more in the north, they probably say autumn a lot more than in the south. But me personally, I've never once referred to it as autumn.
I'd be thinking, ooh, Lawrence, aren't there many surprising word alternatives that Americans use that Brits don't know about? And the answer to that is yes. I merely brought this one up so I could make that very point. This is undoubtedly a pandemic era thing, but I've seen an increasing number of Americans using the word jab to mean shot. I once worked with an American colleague who liked to use the word bonkers. So in part because of the internet, just as Britain is taking on quite a few Americanisms, I think the same is true in reverse.
Oh yeah.
It'll be very interesting to look further into those details. And those are just a handful of myths that some Brits believe about America and Americans.
Hey, some of those were kind of true. Especially the ones about us being loud. I don't know why, we just don't know how to turn the volume down. But alright guys, that is going to do it for 7 myths British people believe about America. Y'all let me know some other ones down in the comments. Maybe I'll do a video reacting to some of them. So y'all let me know down in the comments. If you are new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. Drop a like for more reactions like this. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you got today. Spread love, spread kindness, do something nice somebody day. I love you guys so much. I really do. JTReacts, I'm out. Peace.